shooting the breeze. Wow, a lot of you did brave the elements tonight, so thank you for that. Just tell me when I should start. Yeah. Welcome to this first of what I hope will be many in a series of what I'm calling history and politics and religion. That's actually an acronym for something that I'm not going to reveal just yet, but HP&R will end up making an acronym after we've met a few times. I'd like to tell you a little bit why I am trying this effort with the help of these gentlemen and some others. And I want to start with a quotation from Bill Haslam's book, Faithful Presence, which some of us read and studied last year. He said, "These times call for us to have a sound theology of public engagement so that our politics are driven by our faith rather than our politics shaping our faith. All of us, whether we run for office or not, need a clear picture of what it means to be involved in the political process in a faithful way." And that really is my aim with history and politics and religion. My calling is not to associate Christianity with any particular political party. I'm convinced that Christian faith is really too big for any one political party, let alone any one nation at any one time and place. My calling is to equip the saints for faithful discipleship, which includes professing the lordship of Jesus in the public sphere. And I agree with Governor Haslam that our politics should be shaped by our faith and not vice versa. He says in another section of the book, "I truly believe that our most difficult conversations about our deepest differences would have entirely different results if they were approached with humility. Christians," he says, "are uniquely equipped to address the issues that seem so difficult to solve. Racism, economic opportunity, equity in education, taking care of creation, and our long-term debt challenges are just some of the issues that need to be viewed through a lens of justice, mercy, and humility. Think how differently those conversations would be if they were directed by those three key attributes instead of our need to win an argument." So tonight, in our first meeting of History, Politics, and Religion, I am thrilled to welcome to the stage two longtime friends and law partners and fans of the St. Louis Cardinals, who also have slightly different political perspectives, but who have been walking with me on this road for a long time as members of my Friday lunch group, which was called Faith at Work for years and is now called A Public Faith, and who have all along the way expressed their support for Stuart. If there's anything you want to do with this, just let us know. And so Wally Dietz and Wearen Hughes are here to sort of get us started and model what it is we're aiming for. If you are in the room, then you can see their biographies that we have in the bulletin. I do want to stress for you who are watching us on the live stream that Wearen considers himself a moderate conservative and votes mostly for Republican candidates at least since 1972, when he voted for George McGovern, a vote he says he's still satisfied with. And Wally has been active in Democratic Party politics for his whole life, essentially, and served on the staff of Senator Jim Sasser of Tennessee, and has been very active in campaigns ever since, including being on the National Finance Council for President Obama in 2012. You may know that Wally is currently the law director for the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, so puts his money where his mouth is and is in public service still, serving citizens of Nashville. We're grateful to you two for being here and having the guts to take part in something like this, and look forward to hearing the conversation. But let's open with prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, we rejoice that we can live and breathe and move and work within a community of faith in which we have a common bond in our confession of you and in a commitment to contribute to the well-being and the flourishing of society. And so we ask your blessing on this effort, that this would be one way in which people who trust in you can bear a more faithful witness in society, that you are a God of grace and peace, of truth and love, and that your people can contribute to the flourishing of all for the commonwealth. We ask in the strong name of the Trinity, amen. So Wally and Wearen and I met about a month ago and went through some questions, and I wrote those down, and I decided to ditch all of those, and so I'm going to throw completely different questions at you right now. No, I'm just kidding. This is the starter question, and I'm going to just, to make it easier, Wearen, you go first, and then we'll turn to Wally. Wearen, how has the work you've done helped to shape the person you are now and shape your Christian convictions?
Before I answer that, let me commend Stuart for this effort. I've told him more than once, I think we all would agree that this is needed more now than ever. And I really thank him for this effort. So let's continue to work with him. I would hope that this is a two-way street in the sense that my work has influenced my faith and vice versa, but sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not. But more relevant for tonight, I think the things that I would list are, one, having been with Bassberry and Sims for 44 years, I got to see and practice a group of folks who have different perspectives, including different political perspectives, working together very successfully and very amicably. It was truly amazing. I got to send out emails from time to time on special occasions, usually patriotic holidays and so forth, and I would try to make them fairly, neutral, but it would come across that I was somewhat on the right side of things. I never got any pushback. I always got, compliments, and the people who didn't like them, I guess, didn't say anything. But the point is, I was allowed to do that. And, I wasn't the only one that spoke out on things. So I think the firm was a great learning experience. Also, as a lawyer in particular, we're all charged to try to see and understand all sides to an issue, especially litigators, especially arbitrators and mediators like I am. So that, I think, is critical in that role and in the role that we're talking about tonight. Also, I firmly believe that the best solution to an issue or a problem is one that you come by with agreement and not through battles, not through litigation and so forth. So that'll be a common theme you'll hear from me throughout. And then finally, I've gotten to see and learn about ways to reach resolutions and also how not to do it. So.
Thank you, Stuart. I want to join Wearen in thanking Stuart for putting this together. I know that Stuart has been praying about this for maybe 2 years or so. It's been on his heart. Stuart believes that the church has a role in this to play in promoting civil discourse over social and political issues. And I'm just grateful to him for his listening to that call and actually following up on it. Because, frankly, in this day and time, it's a little bit brave to do what Stuart is doing. And I'm thrilled to see so many people here tonight. And I know a lot of people stayed home because of the weather, but I just think this is a sign that people are hungry for something besides the cable news banter or what you get on Twitter or Facebook. And all that. So that said, there was one exchange, I just have to say. Wearen got a text from one of his friends, a ruling elder saying, go crush that commie liberal tonight. And I know this individual, and so I texted him back and said, I'm no commie liberal, you fascist wingnut. And yeah, I am so sick and tired of that kind of political discourse, that conversation. We can joke about it, but seriously, that's the way a lot of it is. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I believe in this. I've got very good friends on both sides of the political aisle, and one of my best friends is a diehard Ronald Reagan Republican. I've got another close friend who worked in the Reagan White House and got to be very close with the Reagans, and then stayed over for George H.W. Bush and became very close with both of them. And we're friends and we can talk. And so I just am grateful for this opportunity. So how's my work shaped the person I am or my faith? And like Wearen, I was grateful to practice law where I did, because the law firm was supportive of people with different views. We had freedom to express those internally and externally. There was not one message that had to be the message of the firm. I also found it to be overwhelmingly a collaborative, supportive place to practice law, which can be a real challenge sometimes because lawyers can be just a little bit competitive. And so I was grateful for that. And like Wearen actually helped train me in my first years as a lawyer. We had some cases together, and I was grateful that he was one of the people helping to show me how things are done, because Wearen always tried to get to the right result as soon as possible. And you know, if there was a big disagreement, a big argument to be had, he'd get right to it. But he was always looking for opportunities to resolve the matter, knowing that that was actually in our client's best interests. And so I learned that in part from him. I think I was wired a little bit that way. And so I also was shaped, or my work was shaped a little bit by my faith, just by the pro bono work that I did. Wearen has done a lot of that as well. I believed that having a law license was a privilege and that there were responsibilities that went with that. Wearen has always believed that. And so I tried to do a lot of pro bono work, and I'm convinced that that was inspired in large part by my faith.
Thank you both for that. One of the things, I think one of the reasons why people are here in the room and live streaming is because of the sense that we have that our society is increasingly divided and tribalized and uncivil, and that troubles a lot of us. I like to think that there is a great middle in the country that is almost silenced by the extreme voices. And so I wonder if you have in your work experience memories that sort of characterize or illustrate the sort of challenge that we have.
I have one experience that I mentioned when Wearen and I met with Stuart, which was 15 to 20 years ago, I had a lawsuit for a client, and this company was 100% in the right. They had an employee who left, did some things that were 100% unlawful to try to start up a competing company. And so we sued, we went to court, we won, we got injunctions, and for 2 years, that competitor did not make a dollar. But then the contractual restrictions came to an end, and I advised the client it was time to let the litigation go, and he got extremely angry at me. And this was a very heated battle between two very strong individuals who led their respective companies. And I got with the lawyer on the other side saying, we both have an obligation to try to bring this to a closure. And he agreed, as our clients literally were screaming at each other in the hallway outside of a courtroom. And so we eventually got to that point, but I ended up losing that client. And it was a significant client for me, because the client really wanted me to take the other party's firstborn child and their house and everything else, and that just was not possible, and it was frankly also not something I was interested in. And so I felt like I had served the client really well. We got a very, very good result, but there were just certain parts of that relationship that were so vitriolic, I frankly did not have any interest being a part of it. And so I regretted losing the client, but at the end of the day, if that's the way it was going to be, I was happy to move on to other matters.
Thanks, Wally. Wearen?
I'm going to take a little bit different direction from your word challenge and put it on a positive note. Really, at Bass, Berry & Sims, we were all challenged to engage in public life and in public service, community service. Bass, Berry & Sims has a long history in its lawyers being involved in the political realm, not to mention obviously all the, public service and nonprofit that a lot of us, do anyway. But we've had members who've been in the legislature, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and now law director. And those are sacrifices that those of us who haven't done that kind of thing can't even begin to imagine what they are. So, and I heard a speech recently by a very politically active rabbi, and he used the term upstander and bystander. And his message was we should all be upstanders, not bystanders. And you're looking at somebody who's been an upstander over here all his life. And I probably have been more of a bystander than I should have been. And even at my late stage in life, I would like to become more of an upstander. So, and I'd like to challenge everybody in this room to be. I think if the vast middle of our country and state would become more upstanders than bystanders, things would be a lot different.
Wearen, that may be an answer to the next question. I'm going to skip over one and ask if there's an experience, a particular experience that motivates you to try to be an upstander, to take an interest in civility in public life, and to be a positive contributor to the public sphere.
Well, as my background might mention, or as I mentioned, a major part of my practice toward the end especially, and now it's all I do, is being a mediator of disputes and arbitrator of disputes. And in that role, I've gotten to see a lot of how disputes are handled by the parties, the ones who are having the dispute, as well as the lawyers who are representing those parties, and also the judges or arbitrators who are having to decide those cases. So a lot of the same principles that I believe should be used in techniques that I try to use in helping people resolve disputes are not confined to legal disputes. They would apply to any sort of dispute or issue or public debate. And so I would like to see, I'd like to bring that to the public realm, or see that more utilized in the public realm. And I mean, I've got some specifics, but let me stop there, and if we have time, I can go there.
So in terms of experiences that motivate me to promote civility, I'd like to talk about two. One is a good friend that I just mentioned. We were just in Colorado staying with them, and normally, it was much too cold to go outside this past week, but normally Pete and I will go outside, have a cigar and a whiskey, and solve all the problems of the world. over an hour and a half or 2 hours, either before dinner or after dinner. We always look forward to that. It happens all over the world when we travel together or whenever we do get together. Pete and I do not agree on a lot of fundamental issues, and we look for some common ground to see if there is any, but neither one of us is trying to convince the other. It's just a back and forth so we fully understand the other person's ideas about where they are coming from. I love those discussions. I really crave those discussions. I really respect people who have ideas about our society, governance, political issues, social issues, and that kind of discussion is night and day from what you see on your phone. And those I don't really have much tolerance for, and so that gives me confidence that this can work, and that if this model is taken and expanded, that it can work. And the second experience, and I'll try to be very brief, is that my first job out of college was working for Jim Sasser. As Stuart said, we were up in Washington. It was like, okay, dog catches bus. No one expected him to win. We're up there. He's brand new. He's never been an elected official before. He's just turned 40 years old. And so literally the first day we're opening our office in the Russell Senate office building, Howard Baker, a Republican, a leader in the Republican Party from Tennessee, came into our office, went straight to Senator Sasser's office, literally put his arm around Jim Sasser's shoulders and said, "Here, let me show you around." And his staff figuratively did the same thing, came to us and said, look, there'll be elections, there'll be a lot of things we're going to be opposite on and disagree on, but there's a whole lot that we can do together for the good of the country and the good of the state of Tennessee. And that was such a refreshing approach. I just appreciated that so much. I will never forget it. And from what I understand about Capitol Hill in DC now, those relationships aren't there. They don't exist. And I think that's part of the problem that we see, is that people are not trying to have friendships or relationships with people on the other side of the political fence. So I will never forget that experience.
Can I say one other thing about the civility? So you lawyers who are I see a few out there, know that we have ethical rules that we're required to follow. And one of them, it literally says that we're supposed to treat each other with civility. Now, it's primarily talking about your adversary in the court and so forth, but it applies generally. Now, so I will say though that reminds me a little bit of the signs in the restroom where in restaurants where you go in and it says, "Employees, please wash your hands before you go back." And if you're like me, I go, I feel a little ambivalent about that. On the one hand, I'm glad that the restaurant, cares about that. On the other hand, I'm a little concerned that they have employees that have to be told to do that. And so you might say the same with, why does the Supreme Court have to tell lawyers to act civilly? Shouldn't have to, but they do.
And I think we're Reformed Christians in the room, and so we'll acknowledge people are sinful and not innately going to do the right thing all the time. And so it helps to have communities of accountability. What we are doing in this room is something that a lot of people are doing in a lot of rooms in a lot of different contexts, because a lot of us are interested in the society working better, in people being better neighbors with one another and loving their neighbor. A lot of us care about this, and we're trying to do our own little part. Let me ask you both, now let's get down to brass tacks. One political conviction you have that's grounded in your faith, and why that is. Wally, you go first this time.
Okay. For me, I believe in a very strong safety net for people who fall through the cracks, who need help, who need some things that for whatever reason they're not able to have access to. And I personally believe that our safety net is fair, baseline okay, but that it should be actually quite a bit stronger, especially in terms of guaranteed access to health care, and some other things, physical health, mental health, other things. And I believe that is based on faith. I believe when I read the words of Jesus and the people he paid special attention to and where Jesus's focus was, I believe that my faith makes me try to make that safety net as strong as possible. The one thing I want to be clear is that I don't believe that people who may have different views about what the safety net should look like, I don't believe that they're not Christians. I don't say, well, if you're a Christian, you have to think the same way I do. My mind just doesn't go to that. And I suspect there are some people at this church who think that that I can't be a Christian if I'm a Democrat. And I just don't want to get there, but I can only speak for myself in saying that a very strong safety net, I believe, is grounded in my faith.
As someone who is the direct beneficiary of one of those safety nets at this point with Social Security, no argument there. Let me take a little bit different tack, and then going back to what I said earlier about my interest in trying to solve problems and disputes. And I think it's grounded in part in my faith, is that I am a firm believer that solving issues by agreement results in wiser solutions. I think there's wisdom in, I'm going to use the word compromise, but I'm going to be careful defining it there. I think when parties get together and sit down and truly try to look for the, quote, right result, that they end up with a better result than some other method that we normally will fall back on. Two heads better than one, whatever. When the lawyers have probably heard this example, but when I took my mediator training 100 years ago, the trainer gave this example. A mother had two of her kids fighting over an orange, and there was only one orange, and of course they both were saying, well, Mom, I want the orange, I want the orange. And so, well, she didn't stop there. She asked one of them, okay, why do you want the orange? Well, I want to make orange juice out of it. And the other said, well, she asked her, why do you want it? She said, well, I need the peeling to make an art project at school. Well, what did the mother do? She peeled the orange and gave it to one and gave the guts of the orange to the other and solved problem, okay? So when there's somebody trying to work for a solution, not just hearing positions and arguments and battles, but really trying to come up with a solution, I think that's the way to go. I read an article recently where it was about gun violence, but this could apply to anything, where the author said that the problem is that the discussion about gun violence has always been an attempt to win the battle and not solve the problem. And if you apply, you can apply that to any issue we've got. And if the people focus on solving a problem rather than winning an argument or winning an election, we would have a totally different result, but also just the way we conduct our business.
Thank you for both those answers. I have a few other questions I'm keeping in the hopper, but wanted to have a chance for folks who are in the room If there are questions you want to ask, I can come to you with the microphone. I see a hand being raised over here by John Eason, so I'm going to give John the microphone.
For Wally, first of all, that email to Wearen was just a joke, I hope you know.
I laughed out loud, John.
Okay, I thought you would. It wasn't supposed to go viral.
We can joke.
Yeah, so you know as much about politics as probably anybody in our church, and you were there back when things, as you said, were cordial somewhat on both sides of the aisle. What do you see as what really attributed to the Senate, especially because it's not gerrymandered or anything? Why is the Senate so contentious now?
The one thing I've read about that's different from those days, and from the people I know who've been on Capitol Hill for now 4 decades, what they talk about is that personal relationships went by the wayside, because people would go to dinner with other go to dinner with a senator or a representative on the other side of the aisle. Families used to move to D.C. Jim Sasser had 2 children, 6 and 4 at the time. They moved to D.C. The Sassers got to know other couples. Some were Republicans, some were Democrats. Their kids played together. They shared a life together as neighbors and built relationships that went across the aisle. The best example of that is Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, who would, fight over certain legislation, agree on some things, and then they'd have a beer together and laugh. And those relationships, I believe, do not exist in large part anymore. And I think it's much harder. Well, let me put it the other way. I think it is so much easier to demonize the other side if you don't know them, if you don't have a relationship with them. So that I think that is the single largest factor.
Can I add there? So one of our questions, and we might or might not get to it, is there have been changes in the legal profession, and one of the changes has been that there are more lawyers, and so there's so many of them that we don't know, and therefore you don't have the relationship with the lawyers that we did when I started, and we didn't have, even when we started, the relationships that Mr. Bass and all those guys did 40 years before that. It used to be that lawyers would spend all day in court arguing and then go out for a beer or go have lunch or whatever. They could turn it off and still be civil and friends with each other, and that's critical. And when you don't have that, you lose a lot. And just one other thing on my mediation thing. My mediation trainer used a very unique technique. He kept both sides in the same room all day during his mediation. Usually in mediations, you break people up and you go back and forth, but he kept them in the room all day long. Why? Because it's harder to criticize and so forth, somebody when you're in the room with them. And also you develop empathy and so forth. And also when you're making your proposal or responding to your proposal, I guarantee you those are often in content different and certainly in tone different when you've got to talk across the table to somebody as opposed to using me to go deliver it. So personal relationships can be very important, or the lack thereof important.
I'd like to highlight what a key theological point that is that they are making. In biblical theological thought, justice is a relational concept. It's easy in the political sphere to give it another definition. Justice is about fairness. I get mine, you get yours. Whereas God's justice in the scriptures is always relational. The same word in Greek and in Hebrew, it's justice and righteousness. It's about right relatedness. And so I would like to highlight that as an effort at Christian discipleship, what we seek is truly right relationship with neighbor and even with enemy. And so even though in a political sphere, I can hear people saying, well, no, you can't get too cozy with the other side. You know, that's a violation of your principles. What we're going to stress is that your principles should be subsidiary to your commitment to right relationship. The Book of Order in our church says that all, excuse me, just a minute, truth is in order to goodness. And if your truth does not result in right relationship, then it is flawed. That is a stark claim that our tradition makes, and I'm going to stand by it. And I hear both Wally and Wearen saying that right relationship is an essential element in a functioning society, and that's a biblical claim. Other questions? Yeah, Mark.
Well, I wanted to kind of follow on what John said, because I had exactly the same question, and to go a little bit deeper in that, it seems to me that today there is a much smaller group of politicians who are consolidating control over the rest. And they do that in a bunch of different ways, in primarying people, and most importantly, in the way that campaign finance monies are doled out from the national committees back down to, and who controls that. And that's kind of what I see, and I think social media kind of comes in on top of all that. But could you guys comment on what you think about that, and how that impacts things?
Well, certainly the social media and then just the cable news and all that. I mean, if people are there trying to get on Fox News or MSNBC or whatever, rather than solving a problem, you're going to get this. And when they go on and not only say I disagree with somebody, but I mean attack them personally, that doesn't usually end up well as far as trying to solve problems. And then as far as, you know, developing relationships and so forth, emails, texts, maybe not the best way to do that. And so I'm really concerned that while our generation maybe hasn't done a great job at that, the generations that follow us are going to really have a hard time building the kinds of relationships that it takes to follow the word and to make things work. So
I agree with that, and this worries me. And rather than give you my criticism of the Republican Party, let me talk about things that concern me about the Democratic Party. So 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, almost 3 now, we're in the middle of a presidential primary. And if you're for a candidate and you get on Twitter and you start looking at the stuff, sometimes the vitriol within the party is even sharper than it is across the aisle. It gets vicious. And so in 2020, I was supporting a candidate who ended up not getting the nomination. It was Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, who I thought was a common sense Midwesterner and would be great. But what was happening is Bernie Sanders was making a huge run, and it looked like he could actually be the nominee of the Democratic Party. So if you recall, what happened is, and I'm grateful for this, on Saturday night, right before, well, on Friday night, I hosted a fundraiser for Amy Klobuchar. On Saturday night, Joe Biden won South Carolina, and all of the other candidates started dropping out and coalesced behind Joe Biden, who was, within the central part of the Democratic Party, not on a fringe. And that happened organically. That Sunday night, I was at a Biden fundraiser with Dr. Jill Biden, but I think the Democratic Party was this close to nominating Bernie Sanders, and you know, he's a very fine, decent human being, well motivated. I don't want Bernie Sanders to be president of the United States, and I think sometimes our political forces are wired, and it wasn't even the big money. There was some big money behind Bernie Sanders, but it was mainly just organic, grassroots people who were true believers in their ideology, and Bernie Sanders was the candidate who carried that torch for them. And so I'm sorry to go so long, but I think both parties are susceptible to this. In my opinion, the Democratic Party dodged a really bad problem in 2020, but we've got money where nobody knows where it's coming from, and the whole process can be convoluted and distorted.
Frank, did you have a question?
I hear you fellows describing a loss in the civility in our political system. My concern is that our culture is collapsing. And my observation would be, across my lifetime, that happens slowly. And it's kind of like what I understand Ernest Hemingway said when somebody asked how he went broke. He says, well, I went broke slowly and then all of a sudden. And I'm kind of afraid we're in the all of a sudden stage of what's collapsing around us. And I'll be up front, this stuff makes me angry. A lot of it makes me angry, and it doesn't matter. I think, as you suggest, people both on the left of the spectrum and the right of the spectrum get angry over this. And I don't know how to discuss it. I can go up, get in somebody's face and scream at them. That's not my personality, but instead of doing that, I generally do nothing. And I kind of believe that my personal culture is Bible-based. Stuart knows that my theology is very weak, but it's the culture of 4 centuries of my family in this country with a lot of religious people. And if I'm going to discuss something with Bible-based ideas, I'm not picking up on those ideas. For instance, in this church, we don't discuss issues like that, issues that are contentious. We talk about the things that can't be argued, like love one another, but that's not an argument that really finds its way with people who disagree with us. And we have a lot of those issues going on around us.
Does either of you want to take a shot at that? I mean, I can also.
I've
Yeah.
got something to say. Do you want to say something?
Yeah. So one, I think the purpose of this group is to try to help address that and help us all to try to figure out how best to address those things in a civil and in my view, civil equals effective, uncivil equals ineffective. So I hopefully we'll be able to talk about the methods, and also I would assume we'll get into some of those issues and talk about them, and maybe if nothing else to hopefully sort of learn how to do that in ways that will advance us toward, you know, the solution rather than to win a battle or something. I don't know. Is that right? Yeah.
I agree with that. I don't see anger is inherently bad. If somebody has some anger about something, it's because they have some very strong core beliefs and they see something that they believe is contrary to that. I get angry sometimes. What I don't want to happen, and sometimes you know, I'm not perfect. I fall short. Lily's back there laughing. I don't want my anger about something to turn into me demonizing somebody else, and portraying them as evil or whatever. I can express my anger about a situation. I'm not going to list any that have done that in the last few years, but I can think of a few right now. What I try to do is to do something constructive with that. And look, I'm not saying it's all kumbaya if we all sat in a circle and held hands that we'd all come to common ground. I don't believe that. That's not who we are, and that's not how God made us. But I do think it's important that we keep in mind that God made every single person on this planet in God's image, and I want to aspire to love my neighbor and to love my enemies, and frankly, that's really hard. But I try to do that. So anger, I think, is fine. The question is what happens with that anger and what do you do with it, and is there a way to channel it into something constructive?
Yeah, those were both great answers, Frank, and I'll add this. It is absolutely the purpose of this group to talk about issues. I decided a couple of years ago that I would dance around this subject but never actually get at it because it's just too scary. It's too scary and too dangerous in church to bring up core convictions about vexing political issues, because then, you know, it's like Thanksgiving and the family's all fighting and so I've avoided that. And I guess I've gotten old enough now, or just I realize at some point you have to practice speaking the truth in love at the risk of having a fight. And so, yeah, that is the purpose of it. This is the first of several monthly meetings. I hope it's in perpetuity of monthly meetings, but that's where I hope we go. I hope we can actually talk the specifics. And I'll say this, I don't think an exhortation to love is without content. I think to stress that love is the aim is the most important content. If Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, as Eugene Peterson says, you can't have the Jesus way and the Jesus life and the Jesus truth without one another. You can't have the Jesus truth without the Jesus way. And so we have to practice disagreeing with people over things we believe very firmly and do so in such a way that we're bearing witness to the Lord Jesus and not just to our own strong convictions. And so that's what I hope we can practice doing. Yeah, Kathy Gaston.
Wally, you mentioned you believe strongly in a safety net. Do you think the government needs to be that safety net and not the church that it was in the olden days or in the past when the churches were the ones that had the hospitals and the charities? Do you think that's the government's role?
I do. And the reason I do is that the historical safety net through churches and faith-based organizations did a lot. I do not want to understate that. They still do a lot today. But if you look at the poverty rate of elderly people in the United States, Medicare cut that down to less than 30% of where it was, because so many older people literally were bankrupt because of their medical bills. I believe that's the role of the government, to provide Medicare for seniors, Social Security. People cannot really live on Social Security, but at least it's something. And so I don't think the government should be the only player. I think it should be a combination. But I absolutely believe the government has a role in that, and that the statistics demonstrate that it works. I want to say one last thing about that is one thing that I have been so happy to see in my position is the law director for Metro, we spend a lot of time on the homeless issue. And our homeless division, our social teams, general services, social services inside of Metro, their number one go-to partner to help with the homeless situation is the Salvation Army. We could not be doing what we are doing without the Salvation Army, because they will say, okay, give us 50 people and we've got a place for them, and wrap services around them to get them health care, mental health care, addiction services. We could not do what we're doing without the Salvation Army. So I don't want to see the government taking it over, but I 100% believe government has a role.
Yeah, Tyler.
You said you're both Cardinals fans. So, are we talking Stan Musial, Bob Gibson, that era? And then, did you see, for baseball players that go out and hang out with the Willie Mays or the Mickey Mantles, like, would that change your perspective as a fan, a loyal St. Louis Cardinal fan? Has the politics switched a little bit versus, like you said with Jim Sasser, you know, people would come over there and kind of hug each other. You argue all day and all night, but then you go out and, but it seems they almost flip-flop a little bit from my understanding of historical sports. Like, you traditionally stay with one team the whole time, you're not traded. So can you speak to that a little bit, of just far as what is the better approach? Has sports and politics flip-flopped a little bit? What's the best relationship there?
I'll go first, and I'm older. So my earliest memory of being a Cardinal fan is the early 60s, in Stan Musial's last year or two. And then I have distinct memories of the 64 World Series that the Cardinals won. Tim McCarver was the catcher. And little known fact, I went to Tim McCarver's wedding because I got my mother to get me invited because we knew the bride's family. So the downside of that, it was so I was like, I don't know, 8, 10, whatever. The downside was it was a Catholic wedding, and we stood forever. But anyway, back to your point. I think the sports are different as far as, you know, is it okay to, you know, collaborate, you know, go out with the other side. I think baseball has pretty much always been, hey, you know, it's a fraternity, and you can go out and party and all that. I think football maybe has been different for, you know, some obvious differences, but I don't see a huge difference in baseball there, but I don't know, maybe that's one of the things I like about it.
You know, I think my first recollection of being a Cardinals fan was 1964. Waren's a lot older than I am, so he's got a longer history here. But back in the day, the World Series games were played during the day, and in fourth grade, our teacher rolled in one of those big white box TVs that was, you know, it looked like a refrigerator. And for 30 minutes, we could watch the World Series, and I go, everybody in my room was for the Yankees except Sam Pearson and Wally Dietz. And we were for the Cardinals. And I've got a theory about why I picked the Cardinals, but I did, and it went 7 games, and the Cardinals won, and it was great, and I've been a fan since. What I love about baseball is that, and I think there were jerks back in the day. People did not like Ted Williams as a person. He was really disliked. But what I'd love to see in baseball, and you don't see it as much in other sports, is somebody will get a hit, get on first base, first baseman comes over to cover the bag to prevent a steal, and they just start chatting it up. Like, hey, how's the family? Or, you know, can you believe this umpire in the strike zone? I mean, that happens all the time in baseball, and that's one of the reasons I love it.
Yeah, Frank.
I can't let that go.
You're not a Cubs fan, are you?
Obviously, well, my name is Frank Thomas. You can call me the Old Hurt. But just to pick on your last characterization, my boyhood hero, number one hero, was Ted Williams. So if you know me and don't understand me, now maybe you understand me better.
I can't believe there's a Ted Williams fan here. I am so busted.
You know, we are about out of time.
In war, you know.
Yeah? We're about out of time, and so would you join me in thanking Wally and Wearen? I'm going to invite you guys to leave the stage and go sit with your wives. We're going to now conclude with this prayer from John Rogers in Charlotte. If you're here in the room, it's there in the bulletin. Again, I'll invite you you can follow along in the bulletin if you like by reading that as I pray it, or if you just want to close your eyes and to enter into this space, feel free to do that. Again, a word of thanks to Wally and Wearen for setting a good example for us. I think I set the example as an Atlanta Braves fan by inviting two Cardinals fans to be our first speakers. You'll see on the back of the bulletin that our next meeting will be Tuesday, March the 7th. And please be in touch with me. I'd like at our next meeting to engage in a real public dialogue. There won't be two speakers. I will send to you a brief reading for that, less than a page, in which we will discuss some foundational convictions about public involvement by Christians. And so if you're not on the email list, be sure to contact me so I can put you on it. But please join me in this prayer by John Rogers. Eternal God, before we speak, even in prayer, we must listen. We must listen for you to break the silence of eternity, for you to speak to us from beyond, a word of your presence with us and of our nearness to you. We remember that the universe exists because you spoke it into being, saying, "Let there be light, order, heavens and earth." And it was so. We remember that we are because you created us, male and female in your image. We remember that from of old you told us your name, I am who I will be. I am the one who will be present with you, for you, among you, as God. Your name is your promise, your word that makes room in your life for us. And now we would prepare our hearts and our homes for the coming of him who bears your name, who is your promise in person, your word made flesh, even Jesus Christ our Lord. Empower us to welcome and not resist Christ's coming, to prepare and not impede his way toward us and among us. Let it not be that we know the burden of sin but not greet our Savior, that we nurture our resentments and enmities, but not welcome the Prince of Peace, who gives us the ministry of reconciliation, that we continue in discouragement and despair when the light of the world has come, which no darkness can withstand, that we so quickly claim Christ to bless our small plans and priorities, while we fail to discern in him your larger purpose for the world. How then do we make ready for Christ's coming? We could pray for our world, that suspicion, hatred, and violence might be overcome by peace and goodwill, and pledge ourselves to be instruments to that end. We could pray for our nation, that those who govern and enact laws might have a heart for justice and compassion and wise government that overrides personal ambition and party interests, and we could become such citizens ourselves. We could pray for our city, that people of faith and communities of faith might with gratitude and humility follow the best light of their traditions in the treatment of those who are different and in the building up of the common life. And we could do that ourselves in the name of Jesus Christ. Oh God, none of this will cause or prevent Christ's coming. We know that. But it might make us more faithful and effective as those to whom you have given the responsibility to prepare his way, to announce his advent, and to feed his sheep. Even so, Lord Jesus, come. And now, O God, hear us as we pray together the prayer Christ taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Again, thank you all for coming, and please do be very careful going home. Be careful the moment you open the door and walk into the pavement, and be careful driving home. Again, thanks for being here.